Everybody, Jeff with Covet the Camper. Today I'm going to be grinding down, get all the paint off of my tie-down brackets and getting that main structural brace mounted back into the camper with all my new hardware. I've purchased grade 8 bolts for that, grade 8 bolts for the camper tie-downs. So I've got to get all the paint stripped off of these brackets and then get them repainted. I'm just gonna, paint them white again, but they had a little bit of surface rust on them, so I'm gonna get all that off and then get these guys mounted up along with that main brace and get this slide out going. And I'm just using a 4-inch wire wheel on my angle grinder. Should make pretty quick work of this paint. And now I'll get the other one. So it doesn't take very long at all to clean these up with the angle grinder and just a 4-inch wire wheel. Get them nice and clean. I can throw some primer on them and get them painted. All right, just cleaned them up a little bit with some lacquer thinner and get these sprayed. I think either one of these spray can paints will work. This one's got the primer built into it, and I've always liked this particular type of Rust-Oleum. It does cover better. So I've just got one coat on. I'll do a couple more coats and get these mounted. Go ahead and get my hardware sorted out. I purchased a few more pieces of hardware for the lower jack mounts on the rear jacks. I'm going with a grade 5 bolt and nylock nuts. And the way that they built this camper originally was they just have lag bolts, 3-inch lag bolts like this, going into the aluminum framing on the rear wall. The side skirts, it's just drilled through the old skirt was wood. Of course, the new skirt is the composite material. So I'll drill through that with a 3-inch lag on the side going through the skirt into that rear wall for the lower jack mount. And on the back of the rear jack mount, the lower mount, they just ran lag bolts through that as well into the aluminum wall, into the framing of the rear wall. And what I'm going to do is drill all the way through, because I can get in both sides here on the back of the camper. I can get to the back side of that rear wall. So I'm going to drill all the way through. I'm going to use these 2.5-inch grade 5 bolts and some large fender washers and these nylock nuts, and bolt all the way through that wall instead of it just being a lag bolt. I'll have something to really bite into and cinch down on that rear wall to the lower jack mount. And I'll show you in a second a third bracket that I'm going to add for these rear jacks. Now, there's been a couple of instances where the rear jacks have failed on these types of truck campers, these large truck campers. And usually it's in a high wind situation when the camper's off the truck, or when it's really high up when you're getting ready to load it, or when you've already pulled out from an unload and the camper's still really high up in the air. You can get some sway. And when you get that sway, these round tubes on these Atwood jacks, the round tubes will just buckle, and then you've got a camper on the ground. So I came up with some pretty heavy-duty steel brackets that I'm going to mount even lower than the rear lower mounts on the jacks that tie into the steel subframe where the bumper mounts. And I'll show you that here in just a second. I know it's kind of hard to understand without seeing it, so I'll show you here. All right, so these are there's the upper mount, and then down here, it's really just kind of a a makeshift little secure mount a couple of feet lower than the top mount. So it's just a bracket that goes through the wall and into the rear wall framing. So this is an aluminum framed wall. And I got all my wood scrap here I'm tripping over. All these bolts are coming out, and I'm running bolts all the way through, and then you can see where this little strap bracket mounts to the bracket that mounts to the camper. So I can go through that from this side compartment, and back, there's the back of the wall right there. So I can go all the way through that and put some big fender washers. I might even get a piece of like 1/4 inch Baltic birch, some nice plywood, and build, just put some extra bracing in there for those bolts to really cinch down on that back wall. And then these brackets here, which are off of my now 14-year-old daughter's old bicycle when she was about 4 years old. These are training wheel brackets. So this under here is where my license plate mounts, and that's a pretty thick gauge steel support for the bumper. This is the bumper that mounts to that, and I'm gonna drill some holes and mount these brackets just like that, so I can still get my license plate there. And then you can see there's a hole on this one right there. I'll get another one of these types of strap brackets to go around, to wrap around here, just like that. That'll fasten into that hole with another grade 8 bolt. And I'll use 2 bolts. See how there's 2 slots there? I'll use 2 bolts going through. I'll do that on both sides, and that'll just give it another mounting point and a lot less ability for it to sway when it's off of the truck. So we'll have the main bracket, the center bracket, and then a lower bracket. I think that'll be much better. I think anytime I can add a little extra bracing, especially on, the jacks, it's always been, something that's a little bit scary. Taking this thing off the truck, or when I'm loading it, having it so high up in the air has always been a little nerve-wracking. And this will just kind of ease that a little bit, I think, having those extra brackets. And then there are some front brackets for the front jacks that you can mount to the lower part of the jack, the Atwood jack, in kind of the same way. There's a bracket, a round bracket that goes around the tube, the outer tube, the sleeve, and then a pole brace that goes to the main body of the camper, of the truck camper, on the box, the 4x8 box. So those will mount like this. Here, I'll show you. So here's the Atwood jack, and these are the swing out jacks, because I've got a dually, which just makes it even more sloppy. So there's a brace that goes about here, maybe even lower. I think you can mount them in different locations. So as low as possible, I'm guessing a bracket mounts around this sleeve and then ties back into the main body of the camper somewhere in this area. And I think what I'll do is another angle bracket that goes around and secures into the bulkhead and the side here. And the same thing, I can get 2 underneath here, and I'll bolt all the way through with some big fender washers and some grade 5 or some grade 8 bolts. And I think that'll just make things a lot more secure. All right, so I got that front one mounted. And I got my holes drilled and the grade 8 bolts put through. That rear tie-down bracket put in, bolted down and torqued. And then I can finish installing the that main brace. I had to loosen up some of the screws because when I'm tightening down the tie-down bracket bolts, it cinches down on that brace. So I don't want to run my other screws in for the slide out bracket and all that until all this stuff is in all the way. And tighten down. Get this on here. All right, so I don't know exactly what the torque setting is for these, but I'm gonna set them to 40 foot-pounds, because that's about where they were when I undid them. Yeah, that's 40. So I'll get all the rest of these torqued to 40 foot-pounds. I'll do the same with the front. All right, so now that those tie-down bolts are in and torqued, I can go ahead and get this slide-out mechanism cleaned up and lubricated really well, and get those brackets, the main brackets on this side and these guys here, mounted to the inside and torqued. And then I can put those other screws in on the main slide out brace. And for the lubrication, I'm going to use this silicone spray. Now I'm just going to hook up my little 12-volt battery here from my cordless DeWalt and just move this motor just a little bit and grease the other side of this gear out. Okay. And this is in. So on your, if you've got one of these little 12-volt drills, don't try it on any other voltage but 12. You got your positive and your negative side. Kind of cool thing to have for troubleshooting or just testing. You can test your lights and all kinds of stuff with one of those. Also, if you remember the video where I was taking this thing apart, this tube here, which is the extension for in case the motor goes out or something goes wrong and you have to put in the slide manually. This is the tube for the hand ratchet. So don't forget that little grommet right there. Don't lose that guy. And I'm going to go ahead and lube that up with some just some of the slide out rubber lube. Keep that thing a little bit more pliable. And when I go to put it in, it'll be a little bit more pliable to get through that hole. And this is the stuff that I use for my slide out seals, the wiper seal and then all the D-seal on the slide out. I'm going to go ahead and spray it on this guy here because it does condition the rubber, and you can use it as a cleaner also. Just let that soak in for a couple minutes and then just wipe it off. All right, so after I get this thing mounted in place, I'm going to, with some white lithium grease, this is the stuff that I use. I love it. It works really well. Throw a little bit of grease on that gear and a little bit of grease on those teeth on this side as well. I sprayed the spring and all of the little spacers, anything that has some friction, and of course the entire track on both sides with the silicone spray. But I will use the the white lithium grease on the gear itself of the motor. And you can do that a couple times a year. On the truck camper, there's a little access panel. Just pop the screws, move the panel off to the side, and the gear is right there. So you can just, you know, put a little dab of that grease on, run the slide out in and out a couple of times, spray, you know, when you do your silicone spray or your PTFE spray, the Teflon spray, on the actual drive gear, and then the just the teeth on this side. Just make sure that you know, spray it really well. If it's dripping, just wipe a little bit of the drips away, and you should be good for about, you know, 4 to 6 months. Depends on your conditions. If you're in really dusty conditions, do it a little bit more often. But oh, and that's another great thing about using either the silicone or the PTFE lubricant. It won't attract dust or dirt, so or at least it won't attract as much as like WD-40 or something. So don't use WD-40 on the slide out rails or anything like that, because they'll get all gummed up, and then you've got all kinds of problems.